Morning, folks. Councilman Rasmussen here, coming to you with our update or my update, not ours, from our July 17th Smyrna Town Council meeting. As always, start off with my plug. Make sure you're signed up for the Town Tidbits. That's our Thursday email newsletter. Lots of neat things in there. Right, this last week it was some of the summer reading programs and other things that are going on in town, some camps and events and stuff like that. Not a lot of big Smyrna events going on right now, a lot of big things there, aside from certainly our music events, our first Friday music events. Unfortunately, the last one that was July 7th was canceled because of the storms moving through and our inability to set up all of the tents and things like that. But it will be coming back, so the next one for that's going to be August 4th, and then the last one will be in the first weekend, the first Friday in September. So make sure you got those there on your calendar. Come on down to Main Street and see some cool music with all of us. As far as our meeting last night, so we did not have, this is our only meeting that we're having in July. Our first meeting would have been technically July 3rd, but a lot of our council members were traveling. It was tough because of the thing, and Mayor Johnson is out for some medical reasons. In the end, we didn't have enough people to have a quorum. We need at least 4 members of council to hold a meeting, though certainly we prefer to have more than 4, especially if there are items that we need to vote on. But we would have only had 3 people there, so we wouldn't have a quorum for the meeting. Therefore, no official public meeting can occur. So rather than try and reschedule it and then have 2 meetings within like the same a week of each other, we opted to cancel the first meeting in July, and so this meeting yesterday on Monday the 17th was our only July meeting. That's why you haven't seen me in a month if you watch these videos. Which also meant that we actually had a pretty full agenda because there were a number of different items that we needed to come back to or revisit because it had been basically 4 weeks since we'd had our last council meeting. There was a short public hearing at the beginning. I'll talk about that item in a minute. We also, I think I've mentioned this, we started doing, before our second council meeting of each month, we started doing a council workshop. We did this rather than continuing to have a utility committee and a finance committee that were basically council members, and it's one of those items where some council members didn't feel like if you weren't attending all of those different meetings, you might feel like you missed out on things, or there might be information or questions you didn't have. So we opted to create this. Basically, we put an hour on to the second meeting, so rather starting at 7, we have a special meeting starting at 6. It's our chance to have the town staff review changes to the budget, sort of go through how revenue and expenses are tracking, as well as talk about utility-related issues, because those often drive a lot of our budget. They drive a lot of our revenue. They also drive a huge portion of our expenses. So that conversation happened prior to it, which is really just a review chance. We then did have a public hearing at 6:45 before we launched into our normal 7 o'clock meeting. As far as the meeting items went, general updates, there's still planning in the works for a couple of fall events. The first one in September, I believe the date was September 9th. They're working on plans for a family fun day in the municipal park. If you got to attend this, the first year was last year. It's a chance for community organizations, the town, people like that, to put stuff out in the park, let people come out and kind of learn about what's going on, see how things are operating, kids get to play, that kind of stuff. The plans are in the works to do that again this year, and it's sort of ticking along. Councilwoman Gott and the Parks and Rec Committee are working on that one. We did get an update from Chief of Police, so the summer Police Academy, the Junior Academy, is going on. I think the participants are heading up to the 9/11 Memorial today, I think he mentioned, or maybe it's tomorrow. And the Summer PAL Golf Clinic is going along. I think they said there's about 30 participants in that. I could probably use a golf clinic. I'm awful at golf. But so some cool, fun things in summer programs are progressing all throughout the town. As far as items for our agenda, we had a couple of old business items. Back in June, we had 2 requests to look at the potential of adding stop signs. One is at the intersection of Dorchester Court and Fayetteville Street in the village of Lakeshore, and the other was at the intersection of Bluegrass Boulevard and Pebble Creek Street. This is in Hickory Hollow. Both of them are intersections where the residents in that area feel that traffic is moving too quickly, and that there's the potential for accidents or other things to occur. We had Verdantis, which is their town engineer, to go out and take a look at those intersections, as well as do a code review based on what DelDOT says is needed for those type of intersections. In both cases, the engineering review came back and said that stop signs are not warranted at those, because stop signs are not supposed to be used to control speed. There are other methods that you are supposed to implement first to try and control streets. Major streets allow traffic to move through the area. Minor streets sort of connect to it. Both of these are intersections where minor streets already have stop signs coming into a major street, and the request is to add stop signs on that major street. The recommendation from the engineering firm, based on all the DelDOT requirements, is to not add stop signs and to look for other speed control devices. That's really hard, because some of those speed control devices are things that are quite difficult to implement after a road has been built. We're learning this as we look at new neighborhoods and we approve new developments. It used to be that they made these big wide boulevards with plenty of room for parking on both sides and plenty of room for traffic to move through. And unfortunately, what that does is it actually encourages traffic to drive faster. Versus having thinner streets, parking that's closer, bump outs at intersections where it actually physically narrows the road at intersections, things like bigger street trees. All of those are actually visual cues that you can implement to cause traffic to slow down as it's moving through a neighborhood. But what's tricky is that in an already built out neighborhood, those are very, very difficult things to add. You literally need to make the road not as wide. You need to add in all these things, and they can be multi-million-dollar projects in order to implement all that kind of stuff. Versus something like a couple $100 to add in a stop sign, right? So while the recommendation from the engineering firms was that these are not appropriate places based on the DelDOT requirements to have stop signs, one of the reasons for that is that there aren't accidents at these intersections. But the idea that you have to wait for accidents to happen to then justify a stop sign seems a little backwards to, I think, myself and to a number of other members of council. So what we asked staff to do is, noting that DelDOT says that they're not appropriate at these locations, what could we do, or what would be required in order to effectively implement stop signs at these locations? And asking that question of, how would we implement it? What sort of changes would need to be made to curbing and things like that in order to make it work? Because we want to look at this. There are many, many different locations in town where people complain about the speed of traffic moving through their neighborhood. It's on us to try and find solutions to it rather than just say that that's acceptable, when the people living there obviously don't feel that it is acceptable. So we're going to have some additional conversations with the town staff to try and figure out, are there reasonable solutions that are not so expensive that we cannot implement them? At the same time, we've changed our design standards for roads and neighborhoods so that we don't have these issues in the future. The roads are being designed to be thinner. Their on-street parking is part of that, and it makes the roads a little bit feel narrower, so you drive slower. The bump outs and crosswalks at the different interchanges, all of those things are visual cues that slow down cars, and we're going to see those in the new developments that we have. But most of these places we're talking about were approved 20 some years ago, before I think it was really well understood how to utilize these built environment components to help control traffic versus traffic control devices like stop signs. So more to come. Not an easy solution or an easy problem to address. On the side of the new business, there were two items related to the Smyrna Slum Clearance and Redevelopment Authority, what we generally refer to as the RDA. RDA is an entity that the town created to do some things that the town can't easily do, to try and encourage redevelopment in more blighted areas. So a lot of that is downtown, but there are areas in the town where we want to encourage redevelopment or reinvestment in homes and businesses, and the RDA is sort of established and chartered through the state in order to do some of those things. One of the ways that the RDA gets funding is through vacant property fees. We charge if you have a property in town, if you're a property owner, and you are not actively renting that property, if you are not living in that property, if it is basically just sitting there empty, we charge a vacant property fee. It's a couple $100 a year, depending on, it's a sliding fee scale, so it gets higher over time. Those fees, ultimately, once a year, we transfer them to the RDA, and they use those fees to make investments in, a lot of it is grants, facade grants to help people improve the look of their properties if they want to do a project. They're also looking to other ways to either purchase or make larger loans or investments in properties that need more than a couple $1,000s of improvements to make them look a little nicer. So we took action to transfer the 2023 amounts over to the RDA so that they've got that piece of funding. And then the other request from them is, when we make one of these loans or grants, from the RDA associated with a facade grant, we have a restrictive deed covenant that's put on the house, meaning that if somebody fixes up the house and then sells it within 5 years, they have to repay that grant. It costs a little bit of money and takes a little bit of time to create that deed covenant. It's about $77 to process it and file it with the county. What we've decided to start doing at their request is they want to deduct that $77 off of the grant amount. So if you got a grant for $1,000, you'd actually at the end get $933 because that $77 would be deducted. It'll save about $800 for the town, but it's a small thing that they wanted to make a change to the way that they operate. So that was approved as well. Probably the biggest item on our agenda last night was a presentation from the Kent County MPO, the engineering firm that was from Kent County MPO. Sorry, you can hear my phone ringing. I'm not going to answer it. They have been doing an intersection study for the intersection of 306, so Smyrna Clayton Boulevard and Glenwood. We all know that intersection if you ever drive through there. If you've ever tried to make a right-hand turn off of 6 onto 300, off of 300 onto 6, or a left-hand turn off of 6 onto 300, those can be quite difficult to do. Traffic there is not great. They did a traffic study at that intersection to look at all of the different accidents. In the end, I believe there were something like 20. There were a number of accidents. I actually have it here. I can't count them all up. But mostly fender benders, mostly smaller accidents. Traffic isn't moving all that fast through that area, but it's a spot where there's certainly concern. They looked at all of those sort of pieces and they tried to come up with some proposals for what changing this intersection might look like. There were 2 public workshops that were done. There was also a survey. We promoted that. I mentioned it here, and we promoted it out via the town tidbits. They came up with 2 options, one of which sort of leaves most of that interchange, the current interchange between 300 and 6 the same. I'm sorry, I got a phone ringing and they keep calling back. Give me a second. Sorry. One leaves most of that interchange pretty much the same, and it actually adds an extension between Carter Road over to Route 6, providing better right and left hand turns for that traffic moving through there. Not a major change, but the implications of that one are, that in theory it would improve some access and flow rate through there, especially for emergency services coming in and out of the ambulance station right there, and ideally address some of it. But they realized it didn't necessarily address some of all of the traffic concerns or more of the traffic concerns at the intersection that really stirred the conversation to begin with. So there's a second option that they came up with that actually creates almost two separate intersections where Smyrna Clayton Boulevard would actually come around and tee into Glenwood, and then Carter Road would basically flow straight through into Smyrna Clayton Boulevard, but they'd be separated. This would, in theory, address more of the traffic accident concerns, but the biggest issue on this one is that the fire and ambulance services have some significant concerns because of the need to make 90-degree turns to move between Smyrna and Clayton, and there's a lot of response between Smyrna and Clayton, especially on fire. They mutual response and mutual aid between the two fire companies is big. I mean, if there's a fire, they're pretty much both responding at this point. So there was concerns about the emergency services moving through, but it may actually lower the number of traffic accidents better than the other design. In the end, they conducted a public survey. What came out of that is the preferred was option 2 with the 2 separate interchanges. So the public preferred that one. I think it was about 61.4%, but we're only talking about 153 votes that came in for it. So it's not a terribly representative sample of the 25,000 people or so that actually live in this general area and go through that intersection. They put in some more work after hearing from the fire department and the ambulance department about what their concerns were around maneuvering their apparatus. A 52-foot long ladder truck, the tanker trucks and things like that, of maneuvering them quickly through those interchanges. They tried to look at addressing some turn radiuses and things like that to see whether or not they can figure out how to utilize the publicly preferred method of changing this interchange and better meet the needs of emergency services. In the end, they costed out a general cost of what these two things look like. They're very large projects, by the way. The cheaper of the two, which is option number 1, is about $3.6 million. Option number 2 is $6.9 million. Very expensive projects. In the end, it's up to DelDOT to do this. These are both DelDOT roads. DelDOT is in charge of it. They run these community planning things to get input. What they're going to do now is put this into the formal DelDOT planning process. There would be full designs worked up. There'd be more public meetings. It's probably 5 years until DelDOT moves forward with doing something like this, and it would be paid for with federal money. This isn't money that's coming out of the town of Smyrna or the town of Clayton, who we're both sort of participate in this interchange. In the end, it's a state road. They're both state roads, and so the state would be the one making the determination about the best thing there. So it was a little bit tough, a long conversation. Certainly, members of the fire service, the fire chief was there. Chief Thompson was there to talk about their objections or their concerns with the option that is being proposed to move forward with. There's certainly a willingness to continue to work to try and make that as strong as possible. What the final design will look like, we don't really know. This is more the information and like a high-level planning sort of part of the conversation. But we'll see more and hear more about this in probably the next couple of years, and ultimately it'll end up on a schedule, and they were saying maybe 2028 for actually doing this work. So more to come. We'll see how it all plays out. Ultimately, it's not something the town approves. It's not Smyrna or Clayton that approve it. We can participate in the process and provide feedback. It's DelDOT that makes the final decisions about what it'll ultimately look like. So that was a big portion of our conversation last night. We had two other items. Actually, no, we had three other items. Sorry. I did mention that there was a public hearing. This was to do a conditional use application for a property owner. They own a property on South DuPont Boulevard. They want to build two houses on it. It's like a really long, thin property that hits on 13 and East Street. They need a conditional use for anything that's in our corridor commercial district to do residential properties. There's no objection from the town. It was recommended to move forward with it, so it's a pretty simple item to give them the conditional use that they need to build. Basically, think like a duplex, but instead of them being next to each other, they're in line with each other. So they'll be moving forward with that project at some point in time now that they've got the conditional use approval. We also had a discussion about the Kent County sewer rate increase. So this has been in the news. Some people have already kind of seen this. Kent County passed a resolution to increase their 2024 fiscal year 2024 sewer rate to $2.84 per 1,000 gallons of sewage transmitted into the district. That is an increase of about 10%. Right now it is, I believe, $2.58 per 1,000 gallons. What that means is that the county is going to start charging the town more for that sewer that we're pumping into their system. And ultimately it means that the town is going to pass on those increased costs to customers. That $2.84 per 1,000 gallons is a pretty small percentage of what your actual sewer bill is. The major bill is the cost of all of the infrastructure and work that we have on our town side, the pumping systems, the lines, the staffing. But people will see an increase in that portion of it. Right? If you imagine the average person uses about 3,000 gallons of water, 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of water in town. So thus 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of sewage. If you're seeing a roughly 30-ish cent increase per 1,000 gallons, your bill is likely to be about $1 more or so because of this rate increase of what the town's paying. We did have a vote, a motion to make sure that what we're doing is we're just passing on the increase that the town is seeing, and we are going to take some effort to do some more communication. So this has already gone out in the town tidbits. It's already gone out on bills. It will go out on on next month's bill as well. We're also going to put it in the newspaper and go through a process of sending out like a postcard for folks. That still won't reach everybody because a lot of people don't read any of those things. But the town has to make some sort of a concerted effort just to let folks know, because in the end, when people complain about it, they're going to come complain to us, even though this is something we basically have nothing to do with. It's a cost that we have to pass along because it's a cost that goes up and is incurred by the town. So never fun, but that is what it is. And they were very clear, this type of increase is likely to continue for a few more years in this like around 10% per charge to that 1,000-gallon charge, because Kent County has seen dramatic increases and needs to grow its sewer treatment infrastructure that we ultimately pump into. Obviously, we all want functioning sewer infrastructure, right? Nobody wants to live where we do not have functioning sewer infrastructure, and now we got to pay for it. And the last item that was on our agenda for this week was we had a bid approval. The third phase of what we call generally the East Commerce Street project. It's East Commerce Street and Locust Street sewer replacement project. It's been going on for a couple of years. Folks might remember we had the sewer collapse a couple of years ago. Last December, we had another section of that collapse. It's old pipes that need to be replaced. This third piece actually extends the force main, the main line, the rest of the way down Locust Street into Kent County Sewer Station. It will ideally address some of the issues that we've had around smell from some of the manholes, because right now it's a force main dumps into a gravity feed system. This will change out that. This will fix the remaining of those lines. The bids came in higher than we had budgeted for them, in the order of around $800,000 or so higher. So we have a sewer revolving fund loan system that we can ultimately tap into for that increase. So we had the flexibility already to get that additional funding that we needed for it. In the end, we approved the. There were two bids on it. Raybold Construction Group was the one that had the lower bid and met all of our qualifications. So they're the ones who the third phase of this construction is being awarded to. And that is the majority of the agenda from last night. Like I said, there was a lot of stuff, not a small meeting by any means, but a lot to get caught up on since we'd only had one meeting. For anybody who wants to know, our next meeting coming up will be on August 7th. So we've got 2 weeks from now, and that will be back on our normal operating meeting schedule. If you have any questions or any concerns along the way, always try and reach out to me. I'm always happy to try and provide information. If you haven't signed up yet for the Town Tidbits, or you're not getting that information, join us on Facebook, join us on the Tidbits. Hope everyone has a great week, and enjoy the dog days of summer out there. Stay cool.